household savers and the firm's investment spenders. So we got the scenario going that the households decide to do this extra amount of precautionary savings, so they go to the bank and they deposit all these funds instead of buying goods. Well, the bank then is sitting there, or a group of banks sitting there, gee, I got all these deposits I've got to pay interest on, and the way I make money is not just sit here holding these reserves in the till. I loan the stuff out. And my job for society, as it were, my selfish job is to make profits, but inadvertently I serve this social function of getting these little bitsy household savings together and loaning them out in rather large lumps to the firms who are trying to do these investment expenditures. So they say, gee, the problem is I won't make money if I have to pay interest on tons of deposits and I hardly have any loans outstanding. So if I've got all these extra deposits, I better try and get some more loans. Okay? So how do you tempt people to take out more loans, the firms to take out more loans? Well, you cut the interest rate you charge them. Okay? And you can afford to cut the interest rate you charge them if you cut the interest rate you pay the households on their deposits. So both interest rates in that situation would go down. Not because the central planner says it would be desirable for the economy for that to occur. It's because the selfish banker wants to maximize profits. And so that's what he wants to do. He wants to turn off the excess, for the moment, deposits and crank up the amount of loans people are prepared to take out. And the lower loan rate will tempt there to be more loans taken. The lower deposit rate will cause households to say, golly, if that's all I can earn, maybe I better just forget this nightmare and spend after all. Not to the extra saving. So the falling interest rate is the self-correcting mechanism. Okay? So the demand and supply of loans will work, is Say's proposition. When there is a temptation for there to be an insufficient aggregate demand problem, people will flood the banks with their excess savings, and for the moment excess savings. The interest rates falling will turn that magnitude of that down, and it'll also stimulate more borrowing by the firms. So investment will go up, savings will go back down, they'll stay in equality. It'll take maybe, a few months, whatever. So you might have a small recession, but nothing for the government to go and create long-run problems for itself. To step in and do something about it. Just let this work. Okay. Now, the basic problem is that if savings and investment decisions by households and firms are not very sensitive to the rate of interest. In other words, it takes a large interest rate change to cause households to change their savings that much, and similarly, a large cut in the loan rate to get firms to decide to invest a significant amount more. Then the trouble is, economists have to hide behind a demand supply picture now and again. If we have a market for loans here, so you have the quantity of loans here, and you have the interest rate here, you got the savers with a positively sloped relationship, saying the higher the rate of interest I give people, the more saving I'll do. And then, so that's the households, and then you got the firms' investment spending. So the lower the cost of borrowing, the more projects make present value sense, so the more I'll invest. So if you have an increase in savings, like after this nightmare, the people wake up and I show that the households decide to do this exogenous amount of extra savings, not to worry, investment will rise to the occasion and we'll simply move from that market clearing rate of interest to that market clearing rate of interest. No problem. Well, there is a problem if the guys really get scared and move their savings function way over here. They're really worried. It's a bad nightmare, right? And the firms notice this. And they say, well, yes, other things equal, the lower the rate of interest, the more I'm prepared to borrow. But the entire position of my demand for loans, my investment function, depends on my decision as to whether this is a good time to be expanding plant or not. And I don't want to expand plant when nobody's buying my stuff. So my investment function, yes, it's negatively sloped, but it's going to shift to the left. Because I have this complementary concern that this is the worst time. So then the market clearing rate of interest is down here. But interest rates don't go negative, right? Because when I said people don't put their savings in the mattress, it's because they'd rather get a positive rate of return on it. And that's why they take it to the financial intermediaries. But if the financial intermediaries are going to offer you a negative interest rate, I've never met anyone who says, I don't want to spend this $1,000 till next year. How much will it take for me to pay you to take it off my hands for a year? No one's approached me with that because they do have a better option than making that offer to me. They can put it in their mattress and at least get zero. So there's a zero lower bound on interest rates. And that's the goof up. Right? That's when Say's law can fail. When the self-correcting mechanism requires the interest rate to adjust more than is physically possible, then the self-correction mechanism fails. Okay. And And so Keynes's argument would be to say, well, if we think of this little model economy I've been talking you through, remember I said it was just households and firms, but think of it as also having a government. Then the government does net saving or dis-saving too. Right? Because whenever it spends more than it's collecting in taxes in any one year, it's doing negative saving. And it's just an agent for you and I, the households. So if the government does some negative savings at this precise time, then when you have the private savings function plus the government net savings function as being who we're talking about behind the position of this here, and if the government does a lot of dis-saving, the nation's savings function shifts back this way. And we can get out of the negative interest rate problem. So the idea is, if the self-correction mechanism is suspect in this very situation, what you need is either the government to increase government program spending or to cut taxes. Anything that creates a deficit so that the government dis-saving so that their dis-saving rises at the same point in time as the household's positive savings takes a jump. And that can get us back into the toilet. So Keynes, you see, is the guy who says laissez-faire cannot be counted on sometimes. You need an activist government to run deficits in large recessions and so on. Okay? So that's the basic rationale behind why Say's law works lots of the time. But every so often, you shouldn't be such. I don't think it's right to have a once and forever decision about do you believe in laissez-faire or do you believe in interventionist government being required to keep the economy on the rails. I think a good economics answer is it depends. FDR said, "Give me a one-handed economist, please." Because apparently every economist he ever consulted opened their answer with, "Well, on the one hand, people get irritated when you never commit yourself." But I think that's the right answer, right? A lot of the time, the self-correction mechanism does work. But you don't want to just get so enamored of the elegance of that proposition that you don't want to admit that sometimes we get into pathological situations where you have to admit it doesn't. At least I would think you have to. Lots of classical-oriented modern economists just say, well, yeah, but these are exceptions. Let's forget about this and just believe in laissez-faire. And that's what our federal finance minister talked like in November 2008, right? When he was asked, there was an economic update in November, and he was asked, is there going to be a deficit? Is there going to be a recession? Nope. The only reason there'd be a deficit is if there is a recession, and then I wouldn't be collecting as much tax revenue because people wouldn't be earning the income to pay taxes on, and so I don't believe there's going to be a recession, so I won't need a deficit. It won't emerge. And then, of course, 2.5 months later, they bring in the budget in which there's the biggest deficit in Canadian history. So it appears, maybe he was dispensed then, but it appears he was a classical economist, roughly speaking, believing in the self-correcting mechanism. And then when he thought about it a little more, but no, maybe this is one of the cases where I better admit if we can get into this zero lower bound problem for interest rates. Okay. I want to talk about some of the problems and the details about which components of government expenditure, which taxes, and so on in a few moments. But I'd like to describe the self-correction mechanism from a kind of goods and labor market perspective rather than a financial intermediaries perspective, just to kind of enrich our understanding of that process. So I'd like to embark on that. I guess just before I do, I think you can see that if part of a scenario involves financial failure of the financial intermediaries themselves, then of course the entire set of institutions that allows this connectedness between the decentralized decisions of household saving and firm investment is then broken down. And then of course there's no chance, even if we're not all the way to zero, there's no chance that the interaction is going to work out if the institution through which that gettings together isn't there anymore. So you can see why the government was particularly concerned in the U.S. that we not let these financial institutions because then any hope for self-correction mechanism is really dashed. Now, we didn't have those same financial bankruptcy kinds of problems in Canada, partly because we have a branch banking system instead of a unit banking system.